No good. No good. It's all been said before. I need to find something fresh, something new, but Williams says my readers like the fact it's familiar. They find comfort in it. That's why my books sell, and they do sell, thank God for that, for if they didn't, well, who would feed my family? But I'm no George Eliot, though I would like to try to be. Just once, I would love to read a review that drew comparisons with her, that suggested that I had talent. William says I do have talent, a talent for entertaining, for inspiring people. He says that women and men apparently see the world differently after reading my books. They have hope for a better tomorrow. They believe their lives can be different, and they dream about romance. And for a short while, they forget. They forget about the truth that the world is a hard and dark place, that there is suffering and betrayal, that there is disappointment. There is so much disappointment. But there is also love. That is also true. And love can cover a multitude of sins according to my Bible. I have known love. I have been changed by it. I have watched it fade and die. My life. That's most unladylike behaviour, Charlotte. What would my father say? God rest his soul. My father, Benjamin Law, you may have heard of him. Well, they say he's one of Hinckley's greatest Victorians, though. I don't know about that. He was a good man, a great man. I learned what love is from him. He loved me. He loved everyone. When Jesus said the poor are always with us, he took that seriously and made himself aware of them. For he never passed a beggar in the street without dropping a coin into their hands, and if he could, he'd talk with them, hunker down by their side and listen to their story, for as he always used to say, everyone's story matters. Sometimes, if he could, he'd find them a job. Sometimes he'd pay a doctor to visit their family. Sometimes he'd take them for tea in one of the high street cafes, much to the annoyance of the local proprietor. But he never ignored them. He never treated them as anything less than human. He taught me what it was to offer dignity to everyone we meet. So many of those he met and talked with found their ways into the pages of my books. I don't suppose they'd mind. They might even be flattered. My books could be dismissed as shallow and trivial, but they are populated with real people, more than Dear George and more than Mr. Dickens. How many of them can say they lived in a workhouse? Of course, they may have visited, but have they ever lived there, heard the cries, the screams, the laughter, played with the children and their homemade toys in the frost and mud of the yard? I doubt that. And yet I have. My father ran the workhouse for years, a benevolent father to the ragged-trousered family of the fallen and left behind. And we, my family, all lived in the precincts of the estate, but in a house as nice as any in Burbage. It was a parallel world. And from time to time, we'd have the children over for tea, where they would sit like statues, still and silent, mouths open wide, bemused, lost in a world not their own. It was as if they were dreaming. And we would send them back with food parcels they could eat in their familiar corners where they could gossip and ask each other if it had all been real. I played with them. I visited them. I nursed their baby brothers and sisters in their stained sheets and tattered cardigans, but they were never my friends. The gap between us was too wide, and as much as I wanted to cross over to them and hold them, they stayed firmly on their side, sure that they knew their place, and that their place was in the gutter. I didn't know that as a child. It is only with hindsight I can see things as they were. With hindsight comes great experience. Thinking of these things has given me a new idea. I must put it down. A new idea, a new story, a new plot. Oh, that's good. It's good. My word, the rain. Oh, it's as if I've stood under a waterfall. I only went to post a manuscript, a 5-minute walk to the post office. It's as if I've dived fully clothed into the sea. But still, it had to be done. The book was finished and I need that money so badly. I just hope it sells. It's a different tone to my usual work. It's almost political. My friend Tom loved it and I trust his judgment. But William is not so sure. We shall see. I have another one ready to go, more of what the public wants, less of what I want. I wonder if I will ever be free to write about the things that truly interest me. Do you ever wonder who you are? Sometimes I sit here and glance at the mirror and the face that stares back at me is that of a stranger. Just who is that woman wearing the clothes of Charlotte Mary Brame? That's the name sewn into the waistline of my skirt, the collar of my blouse, but who is she? A writer of popular women's fiction? Yes, I am. A mother who has lost children, who has raised children. Yes, I am. A wife who has held and supported a broken husband, a man who has lost all self-esteem. Yes, I am. A daughter, a Catholic, a child of God. Yes, 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 I am all of these, and yet, what do they amount to? Well, this body you see before you collapsed into the folds of the chair, dripping water and self-pity. Me. Right. Perhaps it's time I found out and stopped hiding behind my words and discovered me. For my own sake, I need to live. I was born in Hinckley, one of 7 girls and 2 boys, a noisy party of a family full of life, and yet there were storms. My parents converted to Catholicism out of a conviction that the faith they were leaving no longer fitted their personal beliefs and priorities. They saw in Catholicism an emphasis, a seriousness that was authentic. And their decision caused a sensation. It was seen as a judgment and betrayal, and people were affronted. For a short time, we struggled to maintain friendships. But in time, people came to accept my parents' decision and realised that the good people they were had not changed. Things settled down, became normal. And for me, the Catholic faith offered a source of comfort and joy. I came to love and revere the Mother of our Lord and saw in her the ideal of womanhood that is hidden in today's world. I took inspiration from her in my writing. And all of my heroines had their origins in her. I was a sickly child, and my mother, after who I am named, said they feared for my life. But I pulled through. I always pull through. Even now I have an unquenchable will to live, and I am still so weak and unwell, and yet I go on. I still do that. When I am thinking, when I am writing, it seems as if I were always writing.
Uncle Robert thinks I should pursue my writing. He says I have promise. He said there may come a day when I eclipse his fame. Father tells him to stop talking such nonsense. He said he's filling my head with unwholesome ideas. Whoever heard of a woman making a living as a novelist? Ridiculous. Charlotte will stay at home and do good work like her mother, like all good Catholic women. Indeed. Uncle Robert's poems are wonderful, but he says not of the finest. And he has asked me to look at this by a man who was once the most popular poet in England, who lived here in Hinckley. I think this verse by John Cleveland is meant to inspire me, but really, I like not tears in tune, nor do I prize his artificial grief that scans his eyes. Mine sweep down pious beads, but why should I confine them to the Muses' rosary? I am no poet here, my pen is a spout, where the rainwater of my eyes comes out. In pity of that name whose fate we see, thus copied out in Greece hydrography. All this poem inspires me to his laughter. I mean, my pen is a spout, the rainwater of my eyes. Oh, it is hilarious. I'm sure Uncle Robert has the better of him. And maybe one day, so will I. I much prefer Dear Jane. She is my absolute favourite writer. She captures my dreams so well with her words. Oh, and that opening line. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune should be in want of a wife. One day, I'll write something so good, so arresting.
John Cleveland, mocked and derided by the great and the good, and yet in later life I find some comfort in him. My early verse was poor, but it was sincere. And when I read them aloud at family gatherings, there was much wonder and applause, even from my father, who later told me he didn't yet know that his brother-in-law might be right. My father, how I loved him. The world around him admired him, praised his good works, his fair judgment, his unbiased reporting, but I loved him. And his death tore the heart from me and my family. He was still young. He had so much he could yet do. The town needed him, the poor needed him, we needed him. God saw fit to take him. And we must accept that. My grief was a terrible thing. It is only now, looking back, that I am at peace with it all. His memory haunts my quiet moments, and I find myself smiling at the thought of him, remembering his words, his grin, the feeling of his hands as they encased mine. I walk the streets of my home and catch a glimpse of him in passers-by. A building evokes a picture, a reminiscence, and I am grateful. My writing helped me through. As clumsy as it was sincere, and a healing of sorts came through the words.
Then arise, ye faint hearts, take courage and try, give no heed to despair, nor yield to a sigh. Meet trouble with patience, for life is too brief to be wasted in dreaming, in sighing, in grief. Take courage again to arise and begin, for there is something to fight for, something to win. I shall send it to the local press. They may care to print it. It can do no harm. Oh, look at the time. I promised Mother I would take her classes today. Too much to do, always too much to do.
And for a short while, we ran a school. And then I was married to Philip. From Philip. Is this love? I think it is. For though it feels as though this match were always meant to be, it still seems to have grown from my heart. Here, look. He was a handsome fellow and kind. The flowers, well, he often sends me flowers, though I know he can hardly afford them. He isn't rich, though he he assures me one day he will be. Well, his father is a minister, a Baptist. My mother says they count as Christian, though the priest at the church has other views. This division amongst churches is something I fail to understand. Our beliefs are similar. They're identical in some respects, and our differences seem negligible, but perhaps that is heresy. I know that Philip looks upon Mary with less respect than I. Perhaps all men do. But whatever our views on faith, we are of one mind when it comes to our future. He has not yet made an offer, but I'm sure it will come. And when it does, my joy will be complete. He speaks well. He knows books and loves art. He likes to wander around museums gazing at artifacts and statues and jewels. Jewellery in particular is a passion of his. And also his brother's, George, who, by the most wonderful coincidence, is stepping out with my sister Fanny. She adores him. And I'm sure they'll be very happy together. But there is something in George that makes me ill at ease. He is astute in his affairs, clever and adept, but there is a neediness in his eyes. I'm sure it'll fade if he marries Fanny. I trust it will, for if it doesn't, who knows where that might lead. I think Philip envies him. But Philip is the better man, he has the greater heart. I would rather live with a man who was moderately successful in business and loved me than with a rich man who barely gave me a thought. When I am married, I will have to leave this wonderful place. People will think me a fool for saying such things. Hinckley is no paradise, I know that, but it is home. It is here I was formed, became the woman I am, believing the things that I do. If I were to leave, I would become a stranger, and that scares me. Hinckley is a wonderful place. We are surrounded by glorious countryside, and it is inhabited by people who, even in their poverty, are beautiful. I shall miss them when I am gone. But I know in my heart I will one day return. And I did, when everything had turned to ash. But that was years in the future. The young woman who was so in love with the idea of love, the woman who had the heart of a romantic, had not yet woken to life's realities and the path she was destined to take. I married Philip, and Fanny married George. And then I moved to London and we opened a store. And if I had the strength or conviction to curse the day it opened, then I would. For that was the start of all of our sorrows. There are those among us who love London. Its life, its energy, its life, the speed at which life is lived, it frightens me, and certainly there is much to treasure. I love the museums and the galleries, the contacts I made. But I never made any real friends. Try as I might, I somehow couldn't find my way to trusting people the way I had when I was younger. Philip had friends. He called them friends, but in reality they were vultures circling around a corpse. They could see in Philip what I could not. He was totally incapable of running a business well. And they waited with glee for the inevitable fall. The store was a failure. It was not all Philip's fault. He said so, and I believed him. But losing the store only added to our debts. And that pressure was unbearable. I thank God that I was able to write at this time and that the editors took a kindly eye on my scribblings. They were popular and did well. If they didn't, I know what life inside the poorhouse was like. Philip could have learned from his mistakes. He could have rolled up his sleeve and faced his difficulties head on. One of my heroes in my books would have done. He would have won, though. And in the end, all would be well. Philip was no hero. And instead of facing facts, he ran from them and began to drink. And in finding his sweet release, I found a new torment. I too could have run away from my problems. Divorce was a possibility, but the shame and the admission of failure, and most pressingly the teachings of the church, meant that a possibility was all it was. It was never a real option. How things might have been different if I'd have disobeyed my conscience. I could have found happiness in my own life rather than the lives of my characters. I had friends who supported me, who understood. Tom, who never once turned away. Tom, who called me Lottie like my father. Tom often reminded me of my father. I cannot imagine a life without his friendship. Philip felt his failure profoundly. It was his view that as the man, it was his responsibility to provide for the house, to put food on the table, pay the bills, and it was my responsibility to care for the family, the house, and to his pleasure. It didn't take long to realise that I brought everything to this marriage, and he. It was awkward and embarrassing for us both, but what was the alternative? I'm not sure he ever forgave me. London became too expensive, and so we moved to Manchester, another city, but one whose lights were less bright and the people were less impressive. It was a dour place, and the fog and the rain only added to the darkness we felt inside our souls. We didn't stay long. That was the first of mine to be published in America. I became something of a celebrity in the publishing world. My books were reprinted in all sorts of places, but it was America where I had my greatest success.
I would love to visit America, to walk down the wide streets, to see cowboys riding their horses, red Indians. It seems like such a magical place filled with possibilities. You know what? I will go. When I'm famous and older and my books are in the homes of all the fashionable families, I will go on tours and give lectures on how I write my stories. And I'll be invited out for tea with the president, and I'll meet a handsome young rancher, and
I never did make it to America. I never wanted celebrity, really. Well, my books did well, but they were not mine. I'm not sure I ever understood what was happening. Sufficient to say that I was swindled of a sizable income and cheated by a man whose name I cannot bear to mention. I would have liked to have gone. It was a childhood dream of mine. But then I had so many dreams.
Hello, Dora. You're looking a little peaky today. You need to get out in the sun. You need a warmer climate. I'll take you for a walk shortly. Oh, how I wish you were real, and then I could truly love you. One day perhaps I'll have children. Lots of children. They'll be brilliant and beautiful, and we'll travel the world and...
I did have lots of children. Lots. But most of them died, and those who didn't couldn't find in me the love that I felt for them. I worked so hard I couldn't pay them the attention they deserved. Day and night I would work so they wouldn't end up in the poorhouse. They were too young to understand that it was my love for them that drove us apart. I sit here and think of the young girl I was, the hopes I held, and wish I could ask forgiveness of her for having failed. This was not how it was meant to be. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I forgive you. They were such lovely dreams.
Childhoods are such precious countries, but their borders are so easily invaded and overrun. Childhood's end is a terrible thing, as is the end of love. I'm not sure I ever stopped loving Philip, but merely lost that love in the mess of life. And when, after we moved to Brighton, for my sake as much as his, he became totally incapable of any kind of work at all. When he gave up on life, perhaps I gave up on him. It's a shameful thing for any wife to do, but I never stopped caring. I kept up appearances, but my heart was empty. And I lived my life more and more through the lives of my characters. I liked Brighton. Brighton featured in many of my stories. The sea and the downs were beautiful. The air was cleaner, the sky brighter, and the people had colour. But we didn't stay long. When my mother died, I felt as alone as it's possible for any human being to feel. My husband, he was with me in body but never in spirit. My children were strangers, my friends too far away to hold on to. My mother had been my rock. And when all else had crumbled, she remained. But then she too went away. She is now reunited in heaven with my father. At least I hope that's how it works. I find a comfort in that. A real comfort. But to leave me at such a time as this. Well, there was a time in Brighton where I took a boat trip. I was on my own. Philip was in his study, tucked away with a drink. He would sleep and forget for a while. The children were with their nanny, and so I went to the sea. I loved the sea, but was a little afraid of it. I'd heard stories that on these trips you could sometimes see dolphins and seals, and it sounded exotic and exciting, and I longed for something to stir my soul. The boat was smart. It was blue and yellow. And the captain had a beard. He looked like a Viking, probably was. There was a mate and a boy to help with the ropes and things. And we set sail. Possibly about a mile or so from the shore, maybe further, I did indeed see a school of porpoises. Oh, they were chopping through the waves like razors or teeth. It was exciting, so exciting. And we were served drinks, and there were cakes that didn't bear eating. They were stale and hard, so I dropped them for the gulls to plunder from the wave crests. And as I sat, watching these fighting birds beating the air behind us, I became aware that something had changed. The clouds were dark. The salt spray was more pronounced, and there was a rain in the wind. Well, the captain looked worried and asked us to take shelter as we could. We were to head home at a speed. There was a storm coming and it threatened. I asked if we could outrace it, and the mate, a quiet man, he looked down at the floor and shook his head. And as he did so, there was such a smack of wind that the boat reeled like a boxer in the ring, and the poor man was thrown overboard. Well, the captain threw him a line and dragged him back, half drowned but safe. And we all cheered, as if this were the afternoon's entertainment, but really it was the start of a nightmare. For a full-on 30 minutes, those men fought against God as he threw his winds and waves at us, and I cried out, "Peace, be still," as I knew Jesus had done on a similar occasion, but I had no authority. And my words were lost in the roaring that now encased every second of our lives. It was as if all of creation had wanted us to die, and I thought I might. But I didn't. I lived. And when my feet were once again on the shore, I vowed to live the rest of my life amongst those who I loved. Coming home, shaken and salt-crusted, I said to Philip, "We're moving back to Hinckley." He shouted and swore and raged, but his voice was nothing in comparison to the storm that I had just survived, and he quickly lost heart, sobbed, threatened again to take his own life. For him, Hinckley represented failure. And for me, it was home. And so home we went. I lived in Castle Street, and from my window I could watch the world in motion. People hurried or dragged their feet depending on their destination, and I saw passionate encounters of a stolen kiss or a punch thrown. I saw children with hoops and children with burdens. If I didn't have to work so much, I would have sat at my window all day, just staring and dreaming. I still had the heart of a romantic. People visited. By this point, I had acquired an unsought degree of notoriety. It all depends on what you think of my books, but I never turned anyone away. People came and chatted and dreamed. My words offered new worlds for them to escape into. People were grateful, mainly the poorer sort. And I'm sure there were those who didn't think of me as quite the thing, but I didn't mind. I was the soul of hospitality. I enjoyed their company, their affirmations, their enjoyment. And they sat like disciples, offering me new ideas, new stories, some of which I took, and others which I politely filed away. I returned to the church and was immediately at peace. Oh, the liturgy and the songs offered me a source of comfort as they had my mother and father. I often went on my own and sat a few feet away from my lady, and we would talk as women of the world. I told her everything. I confessed everything. And coming back home to Philip and the house, I often wished I could just keep on walking and enter into a new life. But no. I was dutiful and faithful, and I turned into the door and ascended the stairs and awaited the storm that was surely to come. Philip's rages were terrible to hear. He screamed and screeched like a banshee, and his body twisted into all sorts of shapes that were horrific in their aspect. His face contorted with fear and jealousy and shame. And it always ended in tears, with him on his knees, his hands encased mine, begging for forgiveness. And forgiveness was all I had to give him. If giving up my writing would have helped him, then we would have done it. We would have found new ways to feed our family. But he was so far gone that no amount of change would have made a difference. I continued my writing, continued to lead my double life of happiness in fiction and sorrow and grief in reality. Perhaps if I were to die, yes. If I were to die, that might spur about change. And I still might. I am so weak and unwell. The doctors look at me with a sorrow in their eyes and ask me to slow down, to avoid stress. But to stop would be impossible. To stop would mean an end to everything. And yet, the fear, the struggle for breath, that decision may one day be made for me. I was never the woman he wanted me to be. I was never the so-called domestic angel. I might have been, if he'd have been successful in business. I could have become the quintessential and decorative idol woman. I doubt I would have ever taken that path. But the person that I am now is the person I aspired to be.
In my dreams, I see myself a great success. My books selling their thousands, millions, read by men and women. I see soldiers in the front lines reading of the home they long for, fight for. I see women that sat by a fireside, and when they look up from their page, they see their drab room transformed into a manor, and their husbands become princes. I see people arguing over the merit of my prose and writing papers about me. In my dreams, I see a family, happy and united. In my dreams, I see a day far in the future where I'm remembered and adored, with statues in my honour and my works upon a stage. In my dreams, I see you, and I'm content.
My friends say that I am a woman who is ahead of her time. But in fact, I think I am a woman whose time is at an end. I'm so cold now. The doctors say my blood pressure is so low, that'll be the end of me. Surely not. I have so much left to write. But the pain is greater today, and I can see no end. Perhaps I won't write today, but instead I will sleep, and in sleep perchance to dream. That's a lovely line. I wish I'd have written it. For only in sleep can I escape, and only in dreams is there joy.
They are such lovely dreams, are they not?
Who is there? Philip? Mother, father? It's you. You never left me, did you? You're always here in my heart. Yes. They were such lovely dreams. Well, they still are.